Ki li'olam li'olam hazdoi. Hoidu laHashem ki tov. Ki li'olam hazdoi. Good evening! How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? It's good to be with you. That's the last song on Joey Newcomb's album, To Be a Yid. Thank you, Hashem. That's the name of that whole movement. Thank you, Hashem. The Thank you, Hashem movement. Stickers and other stuff around. It's good to always remember to be grateful to Hashem. Let's light up the darkness. And if the guy singing with Joey Newcomb on that track sounded familiar, it's because it was Moshe Storch. How's everybody doing? It's great to be learning with you on a Wednesday night. Who's with us? Stephen in New Hampshire, Pauline in Arkansas, Yehuda in South Carolina, Bill in Missouri, Hannah in New York, Paul in Chicago, Renee in Indiana, James in Indianapolis, Allison in North Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Bell in Texas, Paul in the Great Northwest, Nancy in North Carolina, Diana in New York, Patrice in Utah, Paula saying shalom with all her heart, Darcy in New Jersey, over there on the YouTube side, Faith tuning in from Grants Pass, Oregon, and Aoife in Ocala, Florida. Welcome, everybody. Another big and interesting daf tonight. We are holding by page 25 here in Tractate Rosh Hashana. We're going to be completing chapter 2 tonight by learning the 7th Mishna and opening chapter 3 with the first Mishna in chapter 3. We begin at the bottom of the B side of page 24, but I'll mention just a couple of things that came up yesterday. One, I think it was Sharon, was asking about the 7-branched menorah. Right? So we often call it a menorah, but what we light at Hanukkah with the 8 candle receptacles plus the one a little taller in the middle, that's really a Hanukkah. It's made for Hanukkah, celebrates the 8 nights. It holds 8 candles plus the additional candle used to light the other candles. The menorah, sometimes translated as the candelabrum that stood in the Holy Temple, had 7 equal cups, 7 equal branches. And we learned yesterday that it's not permitted to have a 7-branch menorah. So I did a little bit of research on that. Of course, there's some conflicting opinions about it. There's sort of 3 views. The middle view, the kind of middle stringency, is where the law is mostly. And that is, you can possess a 7-branched menorah so long as it would not have been deemed kosher for use in the temple, right? In other words, if it was really something that could have been used in the temple, so you're not allowed to possess that because you're having something that is imitating something of tremendous, tremendous holiness, the one menorah of the Jewish people, which we had when the temple was standing. So the more stringent opinion is, if it looks close enough to what the menorah looked like, you shouldn't have it. And so some people will render it sort of unqualified, invalid by covering up one of the cups. But the more standard opinion is if it's meant to hold candles, not oil, if it's the wrong size. Most of them are going to be made out of metal. The original one was made out of gold. It didn't have to be made out of gold. It could have been made out of some other metal and still be kosher to use in the temple if they didn't have a gold one available. But you can render it invalid compared to the original in a lot of different ways. If this question is of interest to you, you can look it up. We also learned yesterday that we have a prohibition against graven images. This came up because Rabban Gamliel had a sun and a moon, these different images, right? And so what was an image? It wasn't a drawing. It was some kind of three-dimensional object that he would use to examine the witnesses who came to testify that they had seen the new moon so the court could sanctify the new month. And they wanted to make sure that the witnesses saw what they said they saw and that what they saw really is the new moon, the little sliver of the new moon for the new month. And so the question was, well, were these figures that Rabban Gamliel had actually prohibited because of the prohibitions on idolatry? And then we didn't have a chance to read all the page yesterday, but the idea is, what's really prohibited is something that could possibly be worshipped or that might give the impression that somebody was committing idolatry by possessing it. Rabban Gamliel, that's really not a concern for the sun and moon figures that he had. But as part of that discussion, it came up, what about if somebody has something similar to the four faces of the angels described in Ezekiel, known as the chariot of Ezekiel? That is absolutely prohibited, even if it's drawn on paper, two-dimensional. But a human face, what about a human face? And the strict opinion about this is, you could have sort of like a bust that would be three-dimensional human face. That would be okay because it's detached from the body. But if you had in your home a statue of a complete human form, that might well be prohibited. Now, there's no danger, probably, that a Jew is worshiping this figure of a statue, nor would we be likely to get the impression that, behind closed doors, he's worshiping this idol and thinking that it is a god. But it would still be prohibited because a statue of a human is an image of a human, and a human is made in the image of God. So in a sense, it's like creating an image of God, or thus an image of God. And that's why it would be prohibited. Now, there's all kinds of exceptions to these rules. If you have some beautiful statue in your house that's a complete human form, and you're concerned about this, talk to your rabbi, do a little bit more research. But at any rate, if it's two-dimensional, if it's a painting, if it's an incomplete form, then it's not going to trigger that prohibition from the little bit of research that I did since yesterday. All right, we continue today on page 20. Well, we're starting at the bottom of 24, but we'll be on page 25 momentarily. This is Mishna number 7 in chapter 2. There was an incident in which, let me just make an adjustment here. There was an incident in which two witnesses came to testify about the new moon before the Sanhedrin. And they said, "We saw the waning moon in the morning in the east. And that same day, we saw the new moon in the evening in the west." And Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said, "They are false witnesses, as it is impossible to see the new moon so soon after the last sighting of the waning moon." However, when these witnesses, arrived in Yavne, right? So Yavne is where the Sanhedrin was reconstituted after Jerusalem was destroyed. So here we have proof positive that the court was still declaring when the new month had begun, according to the testimony of witnesses, even after the temple had been destroyed. At any rate, when these two witnesses arrived in Yavne, Rabban Gamliel questioned them and accepted them as witnesses without concern over this issue that they had seen the waning moon, a sliver of the waning moon, right, early in the morning before light, and then that same night, later in that day, after the daytime, when it became night again, they saw the sliver of the new moon, right? So according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, that's impossible. That can't happen that fast in one day. But Rabban Gamliel accepted it. And now this is unusual, by the way. Usually a Mishnah just states one or two laws, right? Maybe one or two opinions about the laws. Here we have a Mishnah that actually describes a few incidents, and the one we're going to be coming to in a moment at some length. But this is the Mishnah. And there was another incident in which two witnesses came and said, "We saw the new moon at its anticipated time, i.e. on the night of the 30th day of the previous month. However, on the following night, i.e. the start of the 31st day of that old month, the moon was not seen. And nevertheless, Rabban Gamliel accepted their testimony and established the new moon on the 30th day." It would seem that the witnesses must have made a mistake, and yet Rabban Gamliel accepted it. perhaps because Rabban Gamliel had a pressing need to declare that the old month was a short month, not a full month, and to start the new month on the 30th day. It might be something that really benefited the public in terms of when the holidays were going to land, near Shabbos or not near Shabbos, etc. For whatever reason, testimony that other sages deemed questionable, Rabban Gamliel accepted. Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanas disagreed, and he said, they are false witnesses. How can witnesses testify that a woman gave birth and the next day her belly is still large? The way he puts it is her belly is between her teeth, i.e., she's obviously still pregnant. It's not possible that she gave birth yesterday if she's still obviously still pregnant today. If the new moon was already visible at its anticipated time, how could it be a new moon, like no moon, no sliver of the moon, a day later? And Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, to Rabbi Dosa, I see the logic of your statement. The new moon must therefore be established a day later. Now, Rabban Gamliel, the head of the Sanhedrin, already established that the new month had begun the day before. But Rabbi Yehoshua is agreeing with Rabbi Dosa's logic and saying, no, Rabbi Gamliel must be wrong, so we should begin the new month one day later. Upon hearing that Rabbi Yehoshua had challenged his ruling, Rabban Gamliel sent a message to him. The head of the Sanhedrin sent a message to another sage, Rabbi Yehoshua, and said, I decree against you that you must appear before me with your staff and your money on the day on which Yom Kippur occurs according to your calculation. Because according to my calculation, that day is the 11th of Tishrei, the day after Yom Kippur. Rabban Gamliel did not want his authority challenged, questioned in a public way. And so he said to Rabbi Yehoshua, now that you have undermined my authority. Now, is Rabban Gamliel just an egomaniac who doesn't, want to be challenged publicly because his ego can't take it? Or are we in a period right after the temple was destroyed when the sages are reestablishing Judaism in a new way in the absence of the temple, in the absence of the sacrifices, and the regimental sort of, ritual life that had existed for 1,000 years. And now they're trying to get the people to go down a different path, which is going to be a path where praying 3 times a day is going to replace the daily sacrifices and the observance of Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur and all the other festivals. Is going to, now we're used to, holidays include all kinds of traditions and prayer and long ritualized prayer, etc. But this is all being established now, right? There had been traditions that existed in local synagogues away from the temple, but now those traditions are going to rise to the level of this is the Jewish ritual now that the temple and the sacrifices are all gone. And so Rabban Gamliel is saying, you can't mess with that. And we can't have it that the calendar isn't going to be the same for everybody in the Jewish world. And when one sage disagrees with other sages of the Sanhedrin, he's going to change the calendar. And now some people are going to be on the 10th of Tishrei on Tuesday in Jerusalem, but the other people are going to think that's the 9th of Tishrei on Monday, that same day is a different day on the calendar, that Tuesday is the 9th of Tishrei in some other city. We can't have that. And so he made a public spectacle of reprimanding Rabbi Yehoshua and said to him, on the day that you think is Yom Kippur, according to your calculations, you come to me with your staff and your money in your hand, 2 things that you could not carry, would not be permissible to carry on Yom Kippur, right? He's really making Rabbi Yehoshua, he's humbling Rabbi Yehoshua by making him appear in this way. Rabbi Akiva went and he found Rabbi Yehoshua distressed that the head of the great Sanhedrin was forcing him to desecrate the day that he, Rabbi Yehoshua, maintained was Yom Kippur. In an attempt to console him, Rabbi Akiva said to Rabbi Yehoshua, I can learn from a verse that everything that Rabban Gamliel did in sanctifying the new month is done. In other words, it's valid. As it is stated, Leviticus 23:4, these are the appointed seasons of the Lord, sacred convocations, which you shall proclaim in their season. This verse indicates that whether you have proclaimed them at their proper time or if you have proclaimed them not at their proper time, nonetheless, these are the festivals. In other words, maybe the Sanhedrin made a mistake, but when they declared that the new month had begun and that the festivals would be dated according to their sanctification of the new month, that's it. That's the calendar. Rabbi Yehoshua, you have to accept it because according to the Torah, that's it. Don't worry that that by your calculation you think Rabban Gamliel made a mistake. Even if he made a mistake, once he and the court declared the new month, that's it. That's the new month. We all have to follow it. Rabbi Yehoshua, apparently not satisfied, then came to Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanas, the one who he initially agreed with that the calendar was wrong and needed to be changed. And Rabbi Dosa said to him, if we come to debate and question the rulings of the court of Rabban Gamliel, well, then we're going to have to debate and question the rulings of every court that has stood since the days of Moses until now. As it is stated, Exodus 24:9, then Moses went up, and Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, Aaron and his 2 sons, and the 70 of the elders of Israel. That's Exodus 24:9. But why were the names of these 70 elders not specified? Rather, this comes to teach you that every set of 3 judges stands as a court over the Jewish people and has the same status as the court of Moses. Since it is not revealed who sat on that court, apparently it is enough that they were official judges in a Jewish court. Right? So these people might make mistakes. They might not be as great as the prophet Moses. They might not be as great as Aaron. They might not be as great as Aaron's boys, who made huge mistakes and were killed for their mistake. But nonetheless, if they have that color of authority that they are sitting as judges on a Sanhedrin or on a rabbinic court, then we accord authority to them. And so Rabbi Dosa is saying the same thing that Rabbi Akiva said. Rabban Gamliel might have been wrong, but he spoke in his capacity as the head of the Sanhedrin, and we need to respect that. When Rabbi Yehoshua heard that even Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanas maintained that they must submit to Rabban Gamliel's decision, he took his staff and his money in his hand, and he went to Yavne to Rabban Gamliel on the day on which Yom Kippur was occurring according to his own, Rabbi Yehoshua's calculation. Upon seeing him, Rabban Gamliel stood up and kissed him on his head, and he said to him, "Come in peace, my teacher and my student. You are my teacher in wisdom, as Rabbi Yehoshua was wiser than anyone else in his generation. And you are my student, as you accepted my statement despite your disagreement." Now that's where this Mishnah ends, and relating this incident. Now, we encountered this incident before in the first tractate of the Talmud, in Brachos, on page 27 and 28, where it's a very lengthy story. And you might recall that there was this conflict between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, and it seems to have been resolved very nicely. Rabbi Yehoshua submitted, and it was done. But it was not the end of these kinds of disagreements and conflict between them. It happened 2 more times. And when it happened again, that Rabbi Yehoshua sort of publicly, or at least among other sages, disagreed with the ruling of Rabban Gamliel, he tried to sort of toe the line, but he couldn't stop himself from saying what he thought was true. And so then a young student came to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi to get a ruling on something about the time of prayer. That's why it came up back in Tractate Brachos. And Rabbi Yehoshua said, well, look, Rabban Gamliel and his court say such and such, but I would say such and such. And then when Rabban Gamliel got wind of that again there was this challenge to his authority, he called Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi in, because now it was happening a second and then a third time. And what he did is while Rabban Gamliel was lecturing to all the sages and everybody was seated before him, he made Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi stand. Almost like the bad boy standing in the corner. He kept him on his feet. And it was a long lecture, many hours. And the first time, the other sages kind of felt bad for Yehoshua ben Levi that had been called out that way. But the second time, they're like, enough is enough. I mean, Yehoshua ben Levi is sort of like the most respected sage in that generation. And Rabban Gamliel, who's been appointed the Nasi, the leader of everybody, and comes from a very distinguished line, a descendant of Hillel, he needs to maintain and establish his authority, okay, but he can't humiliate Yehoshua ben Levi, and he's gone too far. And once they took the decision that he had gone too far, they decided to have an impeachment. They kicked out Rabban Gamliel as the head of the Sanhedrin. Then they had a huge problem. Who were they going to appoint in his place? Not Yehoshua ben Levi, because he was involved in the conflict that led to deposing Rabban Gamliel. Not Rabbi Akiva, because he had no distinguished lineage that could stick up for him. If Rabban Gamliel's distinguished forebears up in heaven were trying to, stick up for Rabban Gamliel, somebody else had to come from a distinguished lineage so that his ancestors could, sort of help him out up in heaven. And they finally settled on Rabbi Elazar ben Azaryah, who we read about in the Passover Haggadah, the one who said, I am like a man of 70 years. And that comes from this story. He was actually 18 years old when he was appointed the head of the Sanhedrin, replacing Rabban Gamliel. His wife told him, don't take the job. This is way politically too delicate. It's going to be a mess. You're only 18 years old. What kind of authority do you have? What are they going to listen to you? Look what they did to Rabban Gamliel. They kicked him out. But he ended up taking the job, and a miracle was performed for him. His beard turned white overnight, and that's why he's like a man of 70 years. Eventually, things got sorted out. Rabban Gamliel was invited back. But on the day that he was replaced by Rabbi Elazar, the whole, the whole yeshiva changed up there in Yavne in the sense that Rabban Gamliel made it, like an exclusive Ivy League school that only the best and brightest were granted admission to the Beis Midrash, to the house of study, and just regular people who thought, who had a pretense to become a sage but really weren't qualified were not allowed in to learn. Elazar ben Azaryah made it much more, he threw open the doors of the house of study, told the attendant at the door, let anybody in who wants to learn. They can come in. And they added 400 benches to the house of study that day, and some say 700 benches. And the whole character of the learning and who could learn among the sages changed on that day. So all of that story, that long and fascinating story that we covered on Brachos 28, the nucleus of that was the story that we're covering here, the original conflict between Rabban Gamliel and Yehoshua ben Levi about declaring the new moon. And Yehoshua ben Levi said we couldn't have started the new month. Rabban Gamliel was wrong, and then he was forced to come with his stick and his money in his hand on the day that he thought was Yom Kippur, but for the rest of the world, according to the pronouncement of the Sanhedrin, was the day after Yom Kippur. All right. Now we proceed with the Gemara of this Mishnah number 7. It is taught in a Baraisa that Rabban Gamliel said to the sages, in explanation of his opinion, that it is possible for the new moon to be visible so soon after the last sighting of the waning moon. This is the tradition that I received from the house of my father's father. Sometimes the moon comes by a long path, and sometimes it comes by a short one. And Rabbi Yochanan said, what is the reason for the opinion of the house of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, i.e. the house of the heads of the great Sanhedrin, the source for Rabban Gamliel's ruling? As it is written, Psalm 104:19, who appointed the moon for seasons? The sun knows it's going down. And this verse indicates that it is only the sun that knows it's going down, i.e. its seasons and the times that it shines are the same every year. In contrast, the moon does not know it's going down, as its course is not identical every month. And Rosh Steinsaltz explains that, because there's a tilt in not only the axis of the Earth, but in the kind of elliptical orbits also have a bit of a tilt, while the loon's path around the Earth takes 29 and a half days and some hours, pretty much the same every month. Still, the way it arrives and how it arrives and at different times of the year, etc., there's some variations that meant that Rabban Gamliel, the testimony that he was accepting from the witnesses made sense. It wasn't like he was crazy and he was way off base in accepting that testimony. There was a precedent for it. We skip a few paragraphs. The Mishnah taught that Rabbi Akiva went and found him distressed that the head of the great Sanhedrin was forcing him to desecrate the day that he maintained was Yom Kippur. And a dilemma was raised before the sages. Who was distressed? We're assuming Rabbi Yehoshua was distressed. Was Rabbi Akiva distressed, or was Rabbi Yehoshua distressed? And the Gemara answers, well, come in here. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Akiva went and found Rabbi Yehoshua in a state of distress and said to him, my teacher, for what reason are you distressed? Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, Rabbi Akiva, it is fitting for one to fall sick in bed for 12 months rather than to have this decree issued against him that he should have to desecrate Yom Kippur. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi was really torn. I mean, he was, certain in his heart that his calculation was correct, and therefore the day that he believed in with all his heart was Yom Kippur was the day on which he was going to have to desecrate Yom Kippur by walking with his staff and his money in his hand, as Rabban Gamliel had asked him to do. But, if you think about it, Rabban Gamliel had a very strong point. You can't have people celebrating Yom Kippur on different days. The court had spoken and the people must listen. Rabbi Akiva said to him, my teacher, allow me to say before you one matter that you yourself once taught me. So this is a little bit different version of the same story, now in the Baraisa as opposed to the Mishnah. And Rabbi Yehoshua said to Akiva, speak. Rabbi Akiva said to him, it states, with respect to the festivals, the appointed seasons of the Lord, which you shall proclaim them, otam, to be sacred convocations. That's Leviticus 23:2. At Leviticus 23:4, it is written, these are the appointed seasons of the Lord, sacred convocations, you shall proclaim them, otam, in their season. And it is written at Leviticus 23:37, these are the appointed seasons of the Lord, you shall proclaim them, otam, to be sacred convocations. 3 times the verse uses the word them. In Hebrew, otam, which can also be read with different vowelized a little bit differently as atem, in plural, you, plural. Right? Them could also be vowelized as atem, you, plural. And this comes to teach you, you, plural, atem, you people, are authorized to determine the date of the new month, even if you unwittingly establish the new moon on the wrong day. You, even if you do so intentionally, and you, even if you are misled by false witnesses. In all 3 cases, once the court establishes the day as the new moon, it is sanctified, and God grants his consent. After hearing this, Rabbi Yehoshua said to him in these words, Akiva, you have consoled me, you have consoled me. The Mishnah taught that Rabbi Yehoshua next came to Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanas, who proved to him that the court of Rabban Gamliel has the same legal status as the court of Moses. And the sages taught in a Baraisa, why were the names of these 70 elders who sat together with Moses on his court not specified? And the reason is so that a person should not say, is so-and-so the judge in my time, in our generation, like Moses and Aaron? Is so-and-so like Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron? Is so-and-so like Eldad and Medad? Therefore, the names of the other elders were not specified, so that there's no way of knowing the qualifications of the elders in the time of Moses to compare them to later judges. Again, The lesson we're getting is if people are appointed to be rabbinic judges, you respect their authority. Even if you can question what their qualifications are, once they've been appointed in that role, you must respect their rulings. And similarly, it says, and Samuel said to the people, it is the Lord who made Moses and Aaron. And it says further, and the Lord sent Jerubbaal and Bedan and Jephthah and Shmuel and Samuel. And the Gemara explains, Jerubbaal, this is Gideon. And why is he called Jerubbaal? The reason is that he waged a quarrel against Baal, the god of the local idolaters. And Bedan, this is Samson. And why is he called Bedan? As he came from the tribe of Dan. Jephthah, in accordance with its regular meaning, i.e., this is referring to Jephthah himself and is not a nickname. And it says in another verse, Moses and Aaron among his priests and Shmuel among those who call his name, they called upon the Lord and he answered them. We sing that in a really robust way on Kabbalah Shabbos Friday nights. That's Psalm 99:6. And this verse equates Samuel to Moses and Aaron. In this manner, the verse weighed three light ones of the world, i.e., it considered the less distinguished figures of Gideon, Samson, and Jephthah as equal to three significant ones of the world, Moses, Aaron, and Samuel, three of the greatest leaders of the Jewish people. And this comes to tell you that Jerubbaal in his generation is worthy of being treated like Moses in his generation. Bedan in his generation is like Aaron of his generation. Jephthah in his generation is like Samuel in his generation. And this serves to teach you that even the lightest of the light, i.e. the least distinguished individual, once he has been appointed as a leader over the community, he must be treated like the greatest of the great, and all are required to heed him and obey his rulings. I mean, this is quite relevant even to American government, right? Sometimes we have leaders, at national, state, city, at every different kind of a level, and we think, man, this person is a jerk. He should not be in office. But until we elect a new leader or replace him through the process of replacing a leader, we have to be able to look to our leaders as authorities. Right? If we get a bad one, okay, we'll do a better job next time appointing a proper one. But meanwhile, the office that must have respect and authority. And it further says, and you shall come to the priests, the Levites, and to the judge who shall be in those days. Deuteronomy 17:9. But can it enter your mind that a person can go to a judge that is not alive in his days? What then is the meaning of the phrase in those days? It teaches that you need to go only to the judge in one's days, i.e., that he is authorized to judge and decide matters. And it also says, do not say, how was it that the former days were better than these? For it is not out of wisdom that you inquire concerning this. Ecclesiastes 7:10. Instead, one must accept the rulings of the leaders of his generation. And the Mishna taught, Rabbi Yehoshua took his staff and his money in his hand, and he appeared before Rabban Gamliel on the day on which Yom Kippur occurred, according to his calculation, as Rabban Gamliel had ordered him to do. And the sages taught in a Baraisa, when Rabban Gamliel saw Rabbi Yehoshua, he rose from his chair and kissed him on his head and said to him, peace be on you, my teacher and my student. My teacher, as you have taught me Torah in public, and my student, as I issue a decree against you, and you fulfill it like a student of mine. Fortunate is the generation in which the greater heed the lesser. And there we stop. And that's the end of chapter 2. And now we move forward to chapter 3. And we discuss Mishnah number 1. Mishnah number 1 of chapter 3. If the court and all the Jewish people saw the new moon, and the witnesses were interrogated, but the court did not manage to say, sanctified, that the new month has been sanctified before. Now, the court hears testimony during the day. And if night falls on that day before the court, which heard the testimony and heard that the new moon was seen, but the court didn't issue the ruling, the new month is sanctified, then the new month is not sanctified and they're going to make it a full month, a 30-day month instead of a 29-day month. And then the next day is going to be the first day of the new month. Instead of the 30th day, it'll be the 31st day, right? They heard the testimony. The moon was seen. The new month should have begun. But because something interfered with the court speaking, we've seen this ruling before, the new month does not begin because they didn't speak the words. They didn't make the ruling. The new month is sanctified. If the court alone saw the new moon, there were no witnesses, but the judges of the court actually saw the moon. Then 2 members of the court should stand and testify before the others, and the court should say, sanctified, sanctified. If 3 people saw the new moon, and they are themselves members of a court for this purpose, 2 of them should stand as the witnesses and seat 2 of their colleagues next to the 3rd individual who remains of the 3 who saw the moon, thereby forming a new court of 3. In other words, if you had a court of 3 people that was in panel for this purpose, and the 3 of them saw the moon, but now they're the judges, but they need to be the witnesses too. So 2 of them are going to act as witnesses. The 3rd one sits down and acts as a judge, and since you need a court, you bring in 2 other, rabbis who are sufficiently distinguished to serve as judges, create a new court, as it were, so that the 2 other judges who had been judges of the court now can act as witnesses and testify before the court. The 2 standing judges should then testify before the 3 seated judges that they saw the new moon, and the seated judges say, sanctified, sanctified. This procedure is necessary because an individual is not authorized to declare the month sanctified by himself. Rather, a court of at least 3 judges is required. That's Mishnah number 1. I'm almost done, so if you have questions, get them in. We skip forward a few paragraphs. The Mishnah said, if the court alone saw the new moon, 2 members of the court should stand and testify before the others. Now the Gemara ponders. If the court saw the new moon, why is it necessary for 2 of its members to testify before the others? Hearing their testimony should not be greater than actually seeing the new moon. But why do judges interrogate witnesses? Because you want to get the best version of the facts, so you want to get the truth through examination out of the testimony of the eyewitnesses. But if the judge himself is the eyewitness, why, it's already done. He's got the best version of what happened out there because the judge saw it himself. What is the point of hearing testimony now that the 3 judges have actually seen the moon? They saw it. Why don't they just sanctify the new month? And the Gemara responds that Rabbi Azaryah said, the Mishnah is addressing a case where the court saw the new moon at night. Because they saw it at night, their testimony is inadmissible at that time, as testimonies are admissible only during the day. They must therefore wait until the following day and testify before the court as any ordinary person would. And the Mishnah continues, if 3 people saw the new moon, and they are themselves members of a court for this purpose, 2 of them should stand and seat 2 of their colleagues along the 3rd individual who remains of the original 3. And the Gemara asks, why is this necessary? Here too, let us say, hearing their testimony should not be greater than actually seeing the new moon. And if you say that here too, the Mishnah is addressing a case where they saw the moon at night, this case is identical to the previous one, and there should be no need for 2 separate rulings. And the Gemara answers, it was necessary to teach the last clause, which states, because an individual is not deemed credible and authorized to declare the month sanctified by himself. For it might enter your mind to say that since we learned in a Baraisa, cases of monetary law are adjudicated by a court of 3 judges, but if a person was a publicly recognized expert, he may judge monetary matters, even individually. Well, perhaps then here too we would assume that one judge who's an expert in matters of sanctifying the new month should be authorized to sanctify the month by himself. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that this is not so, and that 3 judges are required for the sanctification of the new month. That's what I've got today. Let's check your comments and questions. There it is. Paula Kramer. I have a beautiful necklace my dear husband gave me years ago in silver. It has a seraphim partial face embedded in it. I love it. Never have I thought of it as a thing of worship, of idolatry. Should I not even wear it? Should it be destroyed? No, I'm not telling you that at all. It is problematic, actually, about angels. That's even, the commandment against making a graven image of God or of the attendants of God could be problematic. But also there's, idolatry is much less a thing in the world today. If it's partial, as you say, then it would really seem to not be an issue at all. But there's a lot of nuance to this question, and we've just barely touched the surface of it, scratched the surface of it. So if you're really concerned, talk to a rabbi about it or do some more research. It's definitely not a simple question, and there's no way that based on our superficial discussion, you should feel that you need to destroy this beautiful necklace. It's probably fine. But if you're really concerned, do some further research on it and talk to a rabbi. Bill, personally, it seems like a comment from God that the response he has to the perceived lack of qualifications that Elazar had was just to miraculously change his beard color, a superficial change, perhaps in response to superficial concerns. Interesting. Maybe. I mean, Elazar was willing to do it. His wife was telling him, be careful. This is like a nest of vipers, as it were. It's almost like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, right? You're so young, you're so wise. All the sages respect you, but you have no experience in the politics of the court, as it were. And maybe you shouldn't do it. And then, when a miracle was performed for him, it's not only that now he's a gray beard and they would treat him, with more respect because he seems older. But I think it's what you're saying, Bill. It's like everyone saw that his beard turned gray overnight. And that was some kind of a, heavenly, you're the man, right? And we're going to elevate you. And what was interesting much later at the end of that story, after, Rabban Gamliel realized that he was wrong, and he apologized to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, and Yehoshua ben Levi didn't want to forgive him, but eventually he was placated. And then the two of them, Gamliel and Yehoshua ben Levi, came back to the sages, and Yehoshua ben Levi said, I forgive him. My honor is okay. I'm okay with this. And then they wanted to restore Rabban Gamliel to his position because he had humbled himself. But the problem was that Elazar ben Azaryah had been elevated to be the Nasi. And in matters of holiness, we raise and we do not lower. Right? And that's why we light an additional candle every night of Hanukkah, because in matters of holiness, we upgrade, we ascend, we don't descend. So, and that was the same thing, right? When a high priest got appointed temporarily as the high priest, and then the original high priest, who was sick and couldn't officiate on Yom Kippur or something, and then he got better. Okay, maybe he resumes his position, but the guy who was temporarily a high priest can't go back to just being a normal priest. He's in this kind of limbo. And so they ended up with this interesting compromise that Rabban Gamliel would lecture to the other sages as the head of the Sanhedrin on 3 Shabbats every month. And Elazar ben Azaryah would lecture on 1. So he, maintained a kind of lesser than Rabban Gamliel, but greater than all the other sages, partially in deference to the miracle that was performed for him so that everyone would know that he was worthy of being the head of the Sanhedrin. Carolyn, but what about considerations for precedents? In that way, past judgments are considered. No. I'm not sure what you're asking, but this idea that I mean, for sure, right? The Talmud is kind of like the original text in the world that preserves minority opinions, right? That even though the majority ruled on something, and that's the law that we follow, in these discussions that are recorded in the Talmud, we see the dissenting minority opinion that did not win out, but we hold on to it for the future. And we have a tradition that we follow Beis Hillel in almost everything in their debates with Beis Shammai. But when the Messiah comes, we're going to be capable of living at a sort of more stringent level, and the law in many matters may then follow Beis Shammai. So we certainly do retain these precedents, and we just have to be careful that, but we can't get lost in, well, he says this, he says like that, so the community splits. We need the community to remain unified, and that's why the one who is actually, the ruling authority, we have to follow their rulings. It gets tricky, and then he's replaced. There's a new administration, new laws, etc. But remember that there's much, much, much less legislating going on. What the sages are doing in every generation is interpreting law. They're generally not passing new laws, right? So the US code in 200 years has many more laws, right, than even, the Talmud is 73 volumes, but it's more explaining and interpreting and elaborating on the law, not so much passing new laws. Hannah, what if you had a cloudy day? Right, so we talked about that a couple days ago. So if you have a cloudy day and you can't see the moon, well, then the witnesses can't testify. And so for sure, it's not going to be a short month, a 29-day month, and then start the new month. The moon wasn't seen, so it's going to end up being a 30-day month and start the new month on the 31st day from the previous month, because the court was not able to say sanctified on the sighting of the moon, since there was no sighting of the moon. Annie is honoring, respecting those in authority over us, similar as the commandment, honor thy father and mother. That's a great question. What we saw is they didn't give that source here, right? The source here that was given is you shall, appoint the times, or you shall declare the seasons, right? There's specific laws that apply to declaring the new calendar. But on the general principle of heeding those in authority, I don't think it's honor thy father and thy mother, even though we have a saying that one who teaches Torah to another is like a parent to that person, but they're not a parent. They just get the respect of a parent. So yes, there's tremendous respect, teacher to or student to teacher, tremendous. And in many ways that applies at the level that you're talking about. But the source of following the laws that the elders lay down is actually, I think in the Torah it says, and you shall, go to the elders in those days, the judges in those days. In other words, the Torah has already given a specific source for you shall respect the authority of the leaders in that generation. And finally, Heather, regarding Paula's necklace, wouldn't the necklace be considered art? Then we have to analyze everything that is art, including photographs, painted pictures, and everything. Well, here the distinction was definitely made between drawings and something that protrudes. Some of the paragraphs that we didn't read tonight was like a ring. If it has a human face that sticks out, that's problematic. But if it sticks in, right? It's like if it's the kind of 3D art that sticks out, that protrudes, that's a little bit more like an idol. If it's indented in, much less like an idol. And if it's two-dimensional, not a problem. But this is definitely an issue. We would say, wait a minute, no one here is thinking about worshiping, a Michelangelo statue. It wasn't built that way. It's not equipped that way. Cedars-Sinai Hospital here in Los Angeles, outside, has a replica of the Michelangelo statue of Moses, the lawgiver. And that is a Jewishly run hospital with a mezuzah on every patient room. That's clearly art. I wonder if there were any discussions about whether that's problematic to have a complete human figure, right? It's not just a face. It's like the whole body that Michelangelo carved. And like I said, I haven't done enough research on this to understand the nuances. I just think that maybe some very pious people would not possess such a statue. Some would say, I also saw an opinion about this in the little research that I did, that a Jew would be allowed to possess such a statue. He wouldn't be allowed to carve it, to fashion the image. That owning it is different than carving it. So that may also be part of the equation. If we had a really learned rabbi, an expert on the law of this subject, I'm sure he could give us an hour-long lecture. I am not qualified. We're just introducing these ideas for discussion. And if anyone knows more about it, please let us know. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 26. And the end of Tractate Rosh Hashanah is in sight. This tractate has 35 pages, so we're about 9-10 days away. Have a great night.